Hello everyone. So today we are going to be talking about two of the main concepts in JavaScript. The first one is scopes. So what are lexical scopes? So lexical scope basically means the type of scopes that JavaScript supports, and that includes global, local, block, and nested. And second one is called closure. It's really important property, and you should be aware of it. I'm going to be using Node.js. So for running this code, if you don't have Node.js, that's perfectly fine. You can go ahead and search for any of the JavaScript editors online and click on one of them, and they will take you to the editors section where you can write your own code and you can basically run it like this. So uh, let's get started with this. Scopes. So JavaScript supports four different types of scopes. The first one is global. So if I declare a variable, for example, x is equal to hello world, right? So if I declare this variable as hello world, then I can basically access it from anywhere. So if I say, if I run this now, node scope, this is my file. So hello world, as you can see, it is printed on the console. Even if I create a function over here, so for example, I create a function and I try to access this same variable from inside this function, I will still be able to access it. There is no issue with it. So sorry, I did not call this function. So if I call this function, I will still be able to access it, and there you will see that there are two hello worlds on the screen. And this was the global scope. So basically, it will allow you to access it from anywhere. This variable is basically available from anywhere throughout the file, as long as the code is available and it is running. The second type of, I'm going to comment this out. The second type of scope is local scope. So what does local scope means? So let's say, for example, you have a function and the function name is test, and it's only printing hello, uh, hello world, right? And I'm going to declare a variable over here. Let's say the variable name is x is equal to 10, right? And if I print this over here, x, now if I call this function, I would be able to access it just as you guys might be familiar with it. So I can access it inside because it's inside the function and it is available in the function scope. So this is basically called local scope. What would happen if I try to print it over here? So what will happen? Well, it is not accessible from outside. So it will give you an error that x is not defined because x is only available in the local scope of this function. So between these two brackets, this bracket and this bracket. So it will only be able, you will only be able to access it inside this function brackets. Third type of Third type of scope is block scope. So what does block scope means? Let's say, for example, I have an if statement. If, you know what, let's have a for let I is equal to 0, I is less than 10, I plus plus. And let's say, for example, I have a variable over here, which on every step is going to multiply x with some I with some number. So for example, I'm going to say I multiply by 10, right? So it will multiply every single I with I element with 10. If I print it over here, now you will see that I won't have any error. You know what? Let's reduce this number to, let's say, 4, because I don't want the whole screen to get cluttered with the code. Anyways, so let's try to print it. You see it multiplied 0 with 0 with 10, then 10 with 1, 10 with 2, 10 with 30. So you get like 0, 10, 20, 30. Now what will happen if I try to access the x variable from here? So this is block scope. So whatever you see in this between in these two brackets, this is called block. So in JavaScript, whatever you write in between this, like for example, if I write it, it's only available inside this block. So if I write a variable over here, let's say for example, this will only be available inside this block. It is not available outside this block. So what will happen if I try to run this? Well, I will get an error that x is not defined because it is only available inside the block. This is called block scope. So whatever you declare in between these two brackets, so these two opening and closings, it will only be accessible inside these two brackets only. It won't be, you won't be able to access it from outside. This is called block scope. Then we have a nested scope. This is really interesting. So let's say, for example, you have a function. Let's say I'm going to call it test, and I have a variable over here. I'm going to, you know what, let's call this outer function so that you guys get familiar with it and you will understand what I'm talking about. Outer function, right? So this is like the main outer or parent function. Let's say I have a variable over here, x is equal to 900, right? And let's say there is another function inside this same function. You guys might be familiar with this, that you can declare a function inside a function. So let's say this function is called inner, right? And X is basically accessible inside here. So yeah, I am able to access it from this inner function. This is basically the main concept of lexical scopes. So if I call the outer function, I won't get any errors because I'm allowed by JavaScript to access any variable from the parent function. So if I run it, I won't get any error and I would get 900. This is called nested function. So there is a function inside a function, and that function is able to access any variable and data types that are declared over here. So if I declare anything else over here, let's say for example there is an object, I will still be able to access it from inside the inner function. So this is called nested function. So this was what lexical scope is all about. So you have nested scopes, block scopes, local scopes, and global scope. Don't get them confused. Try to practice it, and you will get familiar with it. Now, what is closures? Closure is another really important property in JavaScript, which is basically used to allow you to access the outer functions variable even after it has been you can say executed. So let's say, for example, I have a function called outer, uh, right? And this outer function has a variable called, let's say, for example, I call it outer var, and the value of this is hello, I am from parent function. So this is the parent function or the main function, right? Now let's say I have another function. This function returns another function, and that function is basically something like this. So what will happen if I try to access the outer variable inside this function? Like what will happen? Well, JavaScript will allow me to, access that variable from outside. But that's not the main point that I'm trying to, say over here. What I'm trying to say is that, for example, if I try to create an object, or so you can say create an instance of this outer function. Let's say, for example, I have O as outer, and as we know that O returns another function. So basically, I can do something like this. So this will basically try to run this function, okay? And the first brackets will try to run this one. So now logically, if you see it logically, we won't be able to, we should not be allowed to access this variable from inside this function. Why? Because this function already executed at this step. So if you see here, this function is already executed. But if I try to run O, I'm still able to access it. Like, uh, how is that even possible? Well, JavaScript uses memoization, or you can say caching. So it will store it in a cache. It will look for functions that are returning child function. So this function is basically called as higher order function. It returns another function as the response, right? So I basically created an object of this. I called this function, right? I called this function, and then I'm calling it again. The O object, I'm calling it again because it's a function, this one. And so let me, let me add a comment over here. This basically calls the outer function, right? And this one basically calls the inner function, which is the return function, or the, you can say, this function right here. So it returns this one. So what happens is that JavaScript will go through the whole code and will check if there is any function that is returning another function. If that is the case, then it will check whether that return function is accessing any variable that is only inside available inside the parent function. So this outer var is only available inside this function. But JavaScript will make sure that this variable is also available inside the function or the return function. It will store it in a memory in the browser memory, and or in the Node.js environment, or you can say in the system memory, and it will make sure that that function is allowed to access it as many times as possible. So if I try to run it again, I will still be able to access it. So you see, I'm printing it twice on the screen. That is because JavaScript stores this variable in memory and allows us to use it as many times as possible in the return function. But if you look at logically, this should not be available over here. So it should print some kind of a undefined, or not defined, or some kind of a it should throw some kind of an error. But this is a property in JavaScript. It is called a closure, and that allows you to access the outer function variable from the return function. So this is what closure is all about. So these were the two main concepts in JavaScript that are really, really important. The closure is, I would say, by far one of the most important concepts in JavaScript, and it is asked in a lot of interviews, so you should prepare it as much as you can. Then lexical scope, you should definitely practice this, because you will get a lot of different type of codes, and they will ask what is the output of this. Like for example, they might give you this type of scenario and will tell you what is the output of this function. So if you haven't practiced it, you won't know what is the output. So try to practice it as much as you can. But this is only the main, you can say, overview of the both of these concepts. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thanks so much.